We need to talk about what Israel's strategy actually is in Iran. I see a bunch of confusion about this, and it is understandable. Heck, Israel and Iran do not even share a border, so this thing is not obviously about land. And while there is plenty of discussion about Iran's nuclear program, Israel does not seem particularly interested in striking Iran's high-value nuclear targets. So, what the heck is happening here? Well, funny enough, Operation Rising Lion, remember that name for later, is about both land and nuclear weapons. But the strategy behind any coercive military process can get quite complicated. Fortunately, Israel's actions thus far help us understand a bit more about where exactly Iran is along its nuclear trajectory. So let's spend some time together today to try to unravel it. We should begin with the substantive disagreement between the two of them, because longtime viewers will recall how war requires both a substantive disagreement and a bargaining friction to begin. Yes, sure enough, Israel and Iran do not share a border. Then again, the Soviet Union and the United States never did either, but that did not stop them from getting into it. And no, this maritime border does not count. But if you think about spheres of influence a la the Cold War, then the puzzle starts to make sense today. You see, Iran loves to meddle in Iraqi politics. Iran also loved meddling in Syrian politics until its favorite faction lost the civil war. That takes you to Israel, where you have Hamas and Hezbollah right on top of it, and they have been longtime Iranian proxies. Pair that with how Iran would prefer if Israel ceased to exist, and this is starting to look a lot like a territorial conflict indeed. And sure, Israel has no interest in conquering Iran. But then again, Ukraine is not about to walk into Moscow either. Point is, territorial conflicts can go just one way. Then again, that does not factor in how Israel has maintained a steady policy of settlement expansion along the West Bank, which makes things look quite territorial after all. Regardless, as I am sure that you all know by now, any substantive disagreement, territorial or otherwise, does not imply that a war should occur. That is because if you worked out what the expected outcome of the conflict would be, you could just implement that instead. Both sides would be better off agreeing because they would avoid the costs of war by doing so. And, in fact, those costs guarantee that a range of settlements exists, where any division inside is mutually better than war. That is why you need a bargaining friction to get a war outcome. That takes us to the preventive war incentive. And I'm going to move through this quickly, because you likely remember some form of this argument from the Russia-Ukraine war, even if you might not think that it is applicable there. Imagine that one day Iran wakes up and discovers that it has a sizable nuclear arsenal. Yep, we've all been there before. Anyway, then what it reasonably expects to obtain through war will be larger afterward. That is true whether we are talking about lines or simple policy influence. The tricky part is that, as common of a phenomenon as spontaneously generated atomic bombs is, in this case, I do not think that Iran will just wake up one day to nukes. Moreover, Israel will see it coming. And moreover, Israel can recognize that in the best possible future from its perspective, the most it could secure from Iran goes out to here. That is, the expected outcome minus Iranian costs, in our mostly metaphorical territory/policy continuum. Back to the lines. If Israel calculates that it could secure more today by fighting to stop Iran from developing a bomb, even after factoring its own costs, you get a preventive war. Something to note, because this often trips people up. The war is not about nuclear weapons per se, in the sense that the parties do not directly gain or lose from the act of proliferation. Rather, nuclear weapons alter the balance of power, and that allows one party to extract more of the item of value from the other. Nukes are just a means to that end. Okay, imagine that Iran is close to developing a nuclear weapon. What does Israel do next? Well, one option is to try to instigate a regime change. Remember how I told you to keep Operation Rising Lion in the back of your mind? Good, because it may very well be a tongue-in-cheek joke from Israel. This is the flag of Iran pre-Islamic Revolution versus the current one. So, bomb Iran a bunch, take down the current flag, and raise the old flag. Hence Operation Rising Lion. Anyway, regime change mitigates the power shift by moving to a leader who is uninterested in building nuclear weapons. The shift goes away by default, as it were. Israel has openly talked about this being a potential outcome of the war, encouraging Iranians to take part in a revolution. And there have been plenty of assassinations targeting one faction of the Iranian government, perhaps encouraging another faction to take advantage of the situation and usurp power. For now, though, such an outcome seems more like a fantasy than a reality. It would be quite a strange world indeed if Israeli strikes of all things resulted in Iranian leader turnover. Of course, Israel seems to understand that, which is why there is a second part of the plan, to directly destroy Iran's nuclear program, something that it has historical experience with. And by destroying, I literally mean destroying. You cannot build a nuclear bomb if you do not have the associated materials. Going back to 1981, there is a parallel that will help us understand what this looks like in practice. Over the course of only a few hours, Israel sent a bunch of F-15s and F-16s through the Saudi desert, had them pop up on the outskirts of Baghdad, and then let the bombs fly. And if you are now wondering why we are looking at a seemingly nondescript patch of rubble from a 2025 satellite photo, it is because Operation Opera, as it was called, was a complete success. Or you could fast forward to 2007's Operation Outside the Box, which was basically a repeat of Operation Opera, but in Syria. That also rendered the target irrelevant, as this before and after picture shows. However, today's air war is nothing of the sort. Against both Iraq and Syria, Israel flew into the countries, dropped some bombs, and then called it a day. Right now, in contrast, we are seeing sustained operations, without any clear indication of an end point. So what gives? Well, trying to figure out the answer may help us better understand where exactly Iran was in the process of building a nuclear weapon. Let's take a step back a second and discuss how to build a nuclear bomb. There are actually two ways to do this, but I'm going to focus on the path that Iran has undertaken, allegedly, because Iran still insists that the program is only for peaceful uses of the atom. You can imagine how Western intelligence feels about that claim. Anyway, step 1, mine uranium out of the ground. Step 2, mill and treat the uranium until you get this delicious substance known as yellowcake. Step 3, convert the solid into uranium hexafluoride gas. Step 4, insert the gas into centrifuges and spin for a really, really long time until you separate out enough of the good U-235 isotope from the bad U-238 isotope. Step 5, convert the gas back into a solid metal. Step 6, fashion it into a weapon. Thus, in my intentionally simplified path toward a bomb, we have 6 steps overall. For perspective, Iraq was allegedly, and indeed not actually, at the yellowcake step, when the Bush administration pushed for a war in Iraq. In contrast, Iran is somewhere around the end of the centrifuge cycle today, with that part elongated because of just how long it takes compared to everything else. It is worth noting that most of Step 6 can be done in parallel, so that process may be very quick. The important point, though, is that there is a band of uncertainty regarding where Iran truly is in this process, with that reflected in the intelligence community's own lack of consensus. The central risk of the operation is that Iran's true position is here, and Iran could accelerate its plans, produce a nuclear weapon in short order, and then do something that would be better left in the history books. But we are mere keyboard warriors. Despite the apparent debates, intelligence organizations still have a better handle on these questions, and the war plan that Israel has adopted so far can help us back out exactly what is happening. Or at least what Israel thinks is happening. So what specifically has Israel done so far? Since we just finished talking about how to build a nuclear weapon, let's start with what Israel has done to disrupt that process. A clear portion of Israel's strategy is to assassinate nuclear scientists. If no one knows what they are doing, then Iran cannot build a bomb. It also serves as a warning to any aspiring scientist to perhaps seek a different field of research, though notably Israel has done a lot of these assassinations before, and it hasn't stopped the current crop. Nevertheless, in terms of facilities, 3 key places to keep track of are Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow. And as I go through each of them, bear in mind that there is a healthy fog of war, so I am giving you our best guess at what is happening. Isfahan is the facility that converts solid uranium into uranium hexafluoride gas. Iran has plenty of the gas already, but it would need to keep on producing more gas if it wants to scale up its program. Isfahan has been damaged but is not destroyed. Over in Natanz, you are looking at enriching uranium in various forms. And I really need to zoom in here because this one is complicated. There are 3 components of the facility worth noting. First is a pilot enrichment plant, second is an electrical system, and third is an underground enrichment facility. The first 2 were not hardened targets, and Israel has destroyed them. The thing is that a pilot plant is not like the centrifuge facility that we saw earlier. It is what you build when you are first starting out, as an experiment. Thus, it is not particularly important for Iran's current progress toward a bomb. The enrichment facility, on the other hand, is a big deal. That is the one that looks more like the earlier photo. The problem is that, it being underground, Israel cannot easily destroy it. As such, it still stands, albeit without power, and with some claims that bombs have gone off above it. I should also note that centrifuges are very sensitive, and it is possible that the power cut alone damaged them. But that is pinning a lot of hopes on a possibility if you are Israel. Consequently, Israel likely has a lot more work to do at that site if it really wanted to kill Iran's program. Our final frontier is Fordow, a further fuel enrichment plant, and the one responsible for producing the highest grade uranium. Note that it is almost entirely under a mountain, making it the most hardened target. More on that in a moment. Israel, it seems, has let that one stand pat, which is somewhat odd given that Iran would presumably produce the final weapon fuel there. In the meantime, Israel has prioritized establishing air superiority over Iran, finding its air defense units like Soviet-era S-300s, and blowing them up. Sprinkle in some targeted assassinations of high-ranking military officials, and a few parts of the energy industry, and the operation looks more like a standard counterforce attack with a touch of counter-value targeting. Indeed, if you had no idea that Iran had nuclear facilities producing enriched uranium at levels unsuitable for scientific use, but consistent with the production of nuclear weapons, then you might think that nothing is out of the ordinary. Just a war, par for the course. No puzzle to be had. Well, now we can put the puzzle back together. The key is that Israel apparently believes that Iran is here, and not here, or here. Remember the strikes on Iraq and Syria? Those countries were using a different method to develop nuclear weapons, but the rough equivalent on this chart puts them here-ish. In other words, previously, Israel could make a targeted strike and destroy each of the programs before they really got off the ground. Thus, the order of the day was to come up with the simplest possible operations and focus on executing them to perfection. Cheap, efficient, and effective. In contrast, no such option is available against Iran today. That ship sailed when the program ballooned to so many different sites. Meanwhile, if Iran were all the way over here, then Israel would have no choice but to go for the facilities immediately, even if it meant high casualties. Based on Israel's actions thus far, though, it appears that Israel is betting that Iran falls somewhere in the middle range, not all the way on the extreme. Tehran has not advanced far enough that it can sprint to a nuclear weapon and immediately force Israel to submit. In turn, Israel is spending so much time on destroying those Soviet-era air defenses to guarantee that when the time comes, it can properly pile on the damage to both Natanz and Fordow. And, in the meantime, Israel is heavily banking on the Iron Dome system to limit Iran's power to strike back. A couple of points here. 1. It is not obvious how Israel would actually destroy facilities so far underground. Maybe the IDF has a capacity that we are not aware of. Maybe the plan is to do so much damage to the exteriors that the nuclear operation becomes infeasible for a long period of time. Maybe the plan is a commando raid, which would explain why Israel would really want to make sure that it is in control of the situation before putting boots on the ground. Or maybe the plan is to convince the United States to join the war, or at least donate more weapons, because US bunker-busting bombs could do the trick. Adding fuel to that fire, the White House released this sizzle reel of Trump's trip to the G7 meeting in Canada, only for the president to leave a day early and head back to the Situation Room, lending credence to the theory that the United States may be joining. But that ties into the second point. Iran will always retain the knowledge and broad technical capacity to start again. Thus, at some level, Israel's game plan needs to convince Iran that going down this road once more would be a very bad idea. Perhaps that is what the counter-value targeting is for. But Israel is still a long way from achieving this war's objectives. Got a question about what is happening with the war? Leave it in the comments, and I might answer it in an upcoming Q&A video over on Lines on Maps Extra. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.